Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Bex here today to do my nonfiction November wrap-up for you. I had 4 books on my original TBR list and I managed to complete 3 1/3 of them, which pretty good for me considering I usually read maybe 3 books a month these days. So I want to share my thoughts on how they went with all of you. The first book that I finished was Beyond Belfast, a 560-mile walk across Northern Ireland on sore feet. This is by Will Ferguson. This was for the Path prompt, and I really wanted to read this book because it has been on my TBR shelf for 10 years at this point, so I was just tired of looking at it there. I wanted to move it over to my red shelves. I wanted to feel the satisfaction of having completed it, and I finally get to feel that. I did actually enjoy this book, maybe a little bit more than I thought I would. I think that's why I was afraid to pick it up, because I just wasn't sure if the humor was going to hit. This is very Bill Bryson-esque. Like Will Ferguson, he's a Canadian author, but if you read Bill Bryson, it's a similar feel to that. However, I will say that Will is much nicer in his descriptions of people. I've sort of given up on Bill Bryson in more recent years because I was just very tired of the sort of derogatory, rude way that he would speak about other people, how he would describe other people. Will does not do that. Like, he certainly has points where you can tell that he's angry or he's making a joke about people that he interacted with, but it never got to the point where I felt really uncomfortable about it. He's hiking the Ulster Way in the turn of the new millennium, so it's like 2000, 2001. The Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998, so there's still definitely tensions on both sides, and he experiences that a bit, or a lot, when he's there. It just sort of, the way it just bleeds into every little thing in society. So he spends a lot of time talking about the people, the politics, the history. So he's talking about, you know, all the way back to St. Patrick up until the Troubles and just noticing things there today. But he also talks about the landscape and just the beauty of it, the ruggedness, the rain, you know, that sort of thing. And it really made me want to visit Northern Ireland. The descriptions of it were so good. Like, I've been to Ireland. I went when I was 12, and I know that Northern Ireland is a different country technically, but it is one island. So their landscapes are similar, and I can picture what it was like being in Ireland back in the day. And so, yeah, and it was beautiful. And so I do want to go to Northern Ireland someday as well. So this just really solidified that for me. As I thought, most of this is about his hike, but he does interweave some family history in there because his grandfather grew up in Belfast, was an orphan, and came over to Canada. And so he's tracing a bit of that family history in there. He talks about it a little bit when he's on the trail, and then there is a bit at the end where he kind of gets some final answers. He goes back years later, reflects on his Ulster Way trek, and then also gets some actual solid answers on his family history. I didn't think I would be that invested, but I actually got quite invested in his family history. So overall, a really good time. I would recommend it if you're looking for a humor travel writer. He has other books. So if you did enjoy Bill Bryson, or you do still, I think giving Will Ferguson a shot is worth it if you're looking for that sort of reading experience. I will say that when I was reading this book, I was listening to Irish instrumental music, and I'm sure that helped my overall reading experience. It was a really good decision. But yeah, this 3.75 out of 5 stars. The second book that I finished was the audiobook, and that was They Can't Kill Us All by Wesley Lowery. Now, when I originally talked about the book, I referred to it with the subtitle, The Story of Black Lives Matter, and I had that cover up on the screen, but this new cover is the edition that I actually read, and the subtitle for that is a little different. It's Ferguson, Baltimore, and a New Era in America's Racial Justice Movement, which I do think fits the book better. I think that subtitle explains and prepares you a lot more for what you're actually going to read. This was my choice for the join prompt because Black Lives Matter was of movement, and I thought it did a decent job if you're referring to the second subtitle, the subtitle that I read it with. I don't think it really was a story of Black Lives Matter. I think it really did focus on Ferguson, Baltimore, and just talking about where we are now. There was a little bit of the history of the founding of Black Lives Matter and who was involved in that, but that was not the main focus of the book. It was a bit strange reading this in 2024 when the book was originally published in 2016, because it's 8 years later. Things have changed in the world. George Floyd happened and all of that momentum, which is also now starting to die off. Yes, it was a bit weird, but it still provided me some context for things that I didn't have context for, or I was aware of, but I didn't have all the details. So I still liked the fact that I picked up this book. I still think it was worth it because I did learn some new things and I was reminded of stuff as well. Like, it's good to just have this stuff jogged in your memory every so often. As he was talking about these different events, I could picture photos that I saw online and picture videos that I saw around the time that all of this was happening. It really focuses on 2014, and that was the year I graduated from university, so I was very much aware of these things. It wasn't like I was a young child and had no idea, so I was getting a lot of memories brought back. A lot of the names that were mentioned were very familiar to me, so it's a sad reason why they're familiar to me, but it did make me feel like I understood more of what was going on because I could recall so much of it. The author, Wesley Lowery, is a journalist, so he was there for a lot of the things that he's writing about, like what happened in Ferguson, what happened in Baltimore. He was there, and so there were sometimes some awkward insertions. Like, you knew he was there. He talks about getting arrested at one point, so that was fine. It was just sort of certain opinions and the way he would insert those opinions into the story about particular people involved in the Black Lives Matter movement that sometimes felt odd to me. It didn't really take away from the story, but it added this extra little bit of awkward that it just didn't quite sit right. So I gave this 4 stars. I'd say it's like a fine 4 stars. It's funny because beyond Belfast I gave it 3.75, but I had like a much happier, fun time with that. But you know, maybe the humor didn't always hit or whatever, whereas this is a nonfiction book that's like, it's covering a tough topic. I love that. But at the same time, it's still just like, it was a fine 4 stars, I guess, because there was a lot of research and gathering of information. I enjoyed being reminded of things and refreshed on things and learning a bit more about something that I was already aware of. Like, I think that's important, so I appreciate it. But yeah, it's almost like Beyond Belfast and They Can't Kill Us All basically had the same kind of rating, but they were completely different reading experiences. Would I recommend this book now? Unless you're really looking for really specific details on what happened in Ferguson and whatnot, maybe not, just because so much has happened since then. But it was another one that had been on my want to read list on Goodreads for forever, so it was nice to finally say, yes, I have officially read this. The third book that I picked up, and the last one that I actually finished, was Fight of the Century. Writers reflect on 100 years of landmark ACLU cases, and this is edited by Michael Chabon and Ayelet Waldman. So this is a collection of essays by a number of different famous writers, a lot of names that I recognized, and each of them is focusing on a different court case that the ACLU participated in. Some of the essays are very detailed and really focus on the intricacies of the case. Other ones are more personal and reflective. Some of them were just more general, very, short, 2.5, 3 pages about it. And they are organized in chronological order. So the first case is in the early 1930s because it's approximately 100 years because this was published in 2020. And then it works its way all the way up to very recent cases. I think the most recent one was 2018. So I did find that I liked the cases, or was more interested in the cases from like the 1970s onward. So I did tab a bit. In the beginning, I was more just tabbing specific lines that I liked. And then as we got closer towards the end and it started talking about cases that I was just more generally interested in, I started marking entire essays as some of my favorite essays. The beginning was a bit tough to get through. There was a lot of cases that involved the First Amendment and free speech and that sort of thing, and so some of them do feel kind of repetitive, and it really just depends on how the author is tackling that particular case, like, and how they write and whether or not you're going to like that essay. So I did learn a lot of things like about specific cases that I wasn't aware of, but then there was also a number that were referenced or specifically written about that I was familiar with. Most of these essays were okay. There was a handful that I was like, no, I'm really glad those weren't longer. And then there was 3 that I really loved. Jesmyn Ward, Anthony Doerr, and Jennifer Egan wrote my 3 favorite essays in here, which, I mean, I've read from 2 of them before. I've read for Jesmyn Ward. I've read a couple things by her. I've read Anthony Doerr, and I actually have a Jennifer Egan book on my TBR bookshelf. So that's kind of fun to be like, oh, I know I like these people, or I want to read something by them, and I really like their essays because they were well written, and not even that they necessarily focus on a case that I knew about. It was just how they went about it was very interesting and made me think. One of the things that you notice in reading this is that these essays were written when Trump was president the first time around, and unfortunately we're moving into the second time around, and so that made me feel really sad to kind of hear them talk about all of the bad things that have happened, whatnot, and just, yeah. So it was a little depressing reading this book, especially in November, knowing what happened at the beginning of November. So yeah, not great. But there were also other times where I felt uplifted or reflective in a positive way, maybe, or reflective in a negative way, like the Roe v. Wade essay. Roe v. Wade had not been overturned at this point, and so to read about it there, it just made me feel a bit sad. And Marlon James actually references in his essay, he talks about how Roe v. Wade is slowly sort of being chipped away at by other cases, and then, oh, what do you know? Here we are now. So Marlon James definitely saw it coming. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this if you're not a bit more interested in the topic. You have to kind of be in a good headspace, especially if you're American, because yeah, we got some tough times coming. And so this reminded me of that. But at the same time, yeah, there was some good stuff in here. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Oh, and I did pick this up for the code prompt because a code of law. The final book that I started but didn't finish was my choice for the shot prompt, going with a sort of medical angle, and I'm currently reading The Doctor's Blackwell, How 2 Pioneering Sisters Brought Medicine to Women and Women to Medicine by Janice P. Nimura. And this follows Elizabeth and Emily Blackwell. Elizabeth is the first woman in America to get an MD, and her sister is to soon follow her. Where I am in the book, there was a bit of a slow start because it was establishing the family and who they were and their sibling, just all that stuff. So that was a bit slow. But then once we started to get into the more medical side of it, that's when my reading started to pick up. So yeah, I'm probably, I don't know if you can even see that, but I'm like 1/3 of the way through the book right now, and I'm definitely liking it a lot more than I did when I first started it. It's interesting because Elizabeth is the one we're focusing on right now because she's the older sister, and she's not exactly a likable person. She has specific morals and things that she wants to accomplish in her life, and that's really what guides her. She didn't become a doctor because she wanted to take care of people. She just knew that she wanted to do something more than becoming a wife and a mother and running a household, and that's sort of the motivation. She really does look down on a lot of other people, women, men who are not as smart as her, not as like intellectually curious as her, and so I understand her character and I like reading about her, but she's definitely not a nice person. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of Emily's story once we start focusing on her a bit, because we are still sort of getting Elizabeth's trajectory. I do plan on finishing this book in December. Once I got through the first, I don't know, 30-ish pages, it started to get a lot better. So I am enjoying it a lot more, which is good. Those are the books that I read or am still reading for the final NonFiction November, officially hosted by Olive. So thank you to her for running, hosting, coming up with all the prompts, etc. for this for the last 10 years. It's been much appreciated, and I do think it will live on next year, even if she is not officially hosting it, because there are a lot of us out here that do love to read nonfiction, and it's nice to have a month to really celebrate that. If you have read any of the books that I talked about, let me know what you thought of them down below. I mean, I know some of you chimed in the TBR, but if some of you are just watching the wrap up and you didn't chime in previously, let me know what you thought of them, or if you're interested in reading any of them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.